Hello, everyone. My name is Rima Tanash, Security Engineer with AWS Security Hub. I also have Logan Collada and Michael Guzman joining me today from AWS Security Assurance Services team. During this tech talk, we'll give an overview about the Security Hub service, what it does, the benefits, and the new PCI DSS standard that we just rolled out last week. After that, we will give a demo of some of the service features with focus on the new PCI DSS standard. At the end, we will show some useful CLI commands that you can use to enable or disable the standard, describe controls, and do some useful filtering. So before I get started, I'd like to talk a little bit about why did we build AWS Security Hub? There are really 4 problems that we addressed. The first problem statement was that many customers that are adopting AWS have various internal or external security and governance requirements, and we really wanted to make it easier for them to meet these requirements. The second problem statement is that oftentimes customers have many different security tools, and these tools need to be integrated together. And also customers sometimes end up spending many hours, sometimes hundreds of hours, normalizing data to put it into a common format so they can do search and analysis on it. The third problem statement was that we have customers that have large number of security alerts that they have and they need to deal with per day. So you need these tools to better prioritize your alerts so that you can understand what are your most important security issues that you need to address first. And lastly, customers wanted a single pane of glass for their security issues. And this is why we built Security Hub. So I want to give a bit of just a quick overview about the Security Hub as a service. As far as the enablement, it is really just a couple of clicks. You can start ingesting alerts and conducting security checks. We have done integrations with some of our core AWS security services, such as GuardDuty, Macie, Inspector, Access Analyzer, and many more. And we also integrated with 41 external partners. Now, all these security services have normalized their data into a common format, which we call the AWS Security Finding Format, or simply ASFF. This means that you can simply turn on a service, the service enable a product integration, whether it's internal or a third party, and start analyzing your findings. And this was a huge pain point that we really solved. We also developed these lightweight correlation rules known as insights. These insights help you correlate different type of security findings together and identify which of your resources are most problematic and where to focus your remediation effort. Security Hub also runs continuous security checks in the background and produces new findings based on desired configurations of certain resources in your account or member accounts that you integrated. Now, the collection of these security checks are known as security standards. To run a security standard, there is a dependency on AWS config, which Michael is going to talk about a bit about the config service and the prerequisites. You will need to enable config so you can start running security checks in a standard such as CIS or the PCI DSS. And lastly, we help you close out that loop and take actions on these findings. We do that via CloudWatch events and other integrations with third-party partners. Security Hub is a regional service and currently available in 18 different regions. You can learn more about the pricing by visiting the Security Hub user documentation. As I mentioned before, we have integrations from 41 different companies. You can see that some companies built multiple integrations, such as Splunk, Qualys, Palo Alto, Checkpoints, just to name a few. All of these integrations are using the ASFF format. And so when you turn on these integrations, they push their data already normalized. Next, I'm going to just give a quick run through of some of the core Security Hub features that we have today. The first one is the multi-account setup. The process is that you identify if you want to designate an account as a master account. And then you can invite member accounts to the master. This enables the master account to see all of the findings for all these member accounts. Now, member accounts will only be able to see their own findings. So insights is another feature. It's a lightweight correlation rule. We have 25 insights. For example, as you see here, this insight is looking for active findings. Then it gives aggregation by AMI name. So this helps you to determine, immediately find which AMI are most problematic. But also this could just be the starting point. You can add additional filters and narrow it more. And finally, security standards. The first standard that we rolled out is the CIS AWS Foundation, Center for Internet Security, which consists of 43 fully automated continuous configuration checks. Those are looking for resource configuration issues, whether you have like proper password policy in place, or is your CloudTrail correctly enabled, etc. And the second standard that we just rolled out last week is the payment card industry data security standard, PCI DSS. And speaking of which, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, who will tell us more about PCI DSS. Michael?
Thanks, Rima. So a brief history of the PCI DSS. It was first released in December of 2004, with the current version PCI DSS 3.2.1 released in December of 2018. For those that may not know, PCI DSS stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, and it is issued by the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council. This council was formed by 5 card payment brands: American Express, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and JCB. These 5 founding members formed the council and created the PCI DSS in order to increase controls around cardholder data as a means to reduce credit card fraud. The PCI Security Standards Council is responsible for managing the security standards found in the PCI DSS, while compliance with the PCI DSS set of standards is enforced by the payment brands. The current PCI DSS, version 3.2.1, is made up of 12 requirements with 251 sub-requirements. These requirements and sub-requirements are in support of 6 stated goals: build and maintain a secure network, protect cardholder data, maintain a vulnerability management program, implement strong access control measures, regularly monitor and test networks, and finally to maintain an information security policy. Adherence to the PCI DSS is evidenced by the completion of a report on compliance or self-assessment questionnaire and the receipt of an attestation of compliance. These activities most often involve the services of a qualified security assessor or QSA. The rule checks reported in AWS Security Hub are a valuable tool for customers in meeting and evidencing their compliance with PCI DSS 3.2.1. As I just mentioned, the QSA is a person certified by the PCI Security Standards Council to perform PCI DSS assessments for organizations and to complete report on compliance, self-assessment questionnaire, and attestation of compliance forms. Here at AWS, there is a team of QSAs on the AWS Security Assurance Services team that helped review the AWS Security Hub rules for relevance to the requirements in the PCI DSS. As a bit of background, we were formed in 2018 and are a wholly owned subsidiary of AWS, operating as a qualified security assessor company, also known as a QSAC. We are able to perform all functions of a QSA. Our main focus in regards to this effort was to review and provide subject matter expertise rationale for all AWS Security Hub rule checks that we thought could benefit a customer in their effort to meet PCI DSS compliance. The project team's validation and input process was pretty straightforward. We first looked to see if the PCI DSS requirement in focus could be checked automatically/programmatically. An example of this would be checking to see if MFA is enforced per PCI DSS requirement 8.3. If the answer was no, then we ruled it out of scope for Security Hub rule checks. If the answer was yes, we then identified the relevant AWS services that were in scope for this PCI DSS requirement. Next, we looked for the applicable AWS config rules that could be used to check for the state of this AWS service in regards to the PCI DSS requirement. We would then validate this information by testing these rules in our lab using some common AWS configurations, observe the results, and write a rationale/justification as to why this AWS Security Hub rule check helped meet the specified PCI DSS requirement. For those PCI DSS requirements that could be automated, but there currently was not a corresponding AWS Security Hub rule check, we defined the requirements for the rule and associated PCI DSS requirements and added this information to a current log used to develop new rule checks. Out of this effort, we have the AWS Security Hub user guide. This user guide will help customers gain an understanding of the AWS config rules used and the rationale from the QSAs on how this rule applies to the identified PCI DSS 3.2.1 requirements. The structure is as follows. We have AWS control, which is the associated AWS config rule. Then we have severity. This is the AWS severity risk ranking. I want to be clear, it's not specific to PCI, as PCI does not use a risk ranking. Next, we have resource, the AWS service that the AWS config rule is checking against. Then we have AWS config rule. This is the full name and explanation of the AWS config rule function and some additional information. Then we have associated PCI DSS requirements. This is the applicable PCI DSS requirement name and explanation, as well as the rationale why this AWS Security Hub rule check meets the specified PCI DSS requirement. Lastly, we have remediation. These are instructions on how the customer can configure the service in order to be compliant with the AWS Security Hub rule check. Now we're going to have Logan, and he is going to give a demonstration on how AWS Security Hub helps customers with their PCI DSS compliance efforts. Logan?
Great, thank you. As Michael stated, I will be taking you through a demo of the new PCI standard within Security Hub. So when you first log into the console, we'll want to either search for or click on Security Hub to access the dashboard. So once we're there, you will land on a Security Hub summary page. This page includes various dashboard summaries from the options here on the left panel. We'll quickly walk through these items as an overview before diving into the PCI standard. Let's start with insights. Kind of as Rima mentioned, this is going to be a curated search across findings that Security Hub thinks may be most important or would be abnormal in an environment. You also have the ability to create your own up here on the top right. Moving on to findings. Here is where you'll have one view of all ingested findings, and this would be across member accounts and other standards as well. Moving to integrations. Integrations includes the ability to ingest findings from other sources such as Macy, GuardDuty, or other third parties, as you can see here. Moving on to settings. Here, as Rima mentioned, you can enable member accounts to share their findings with you. That would be shown right here if you had any accounts enabled. Additionally, I'll move over to custom actions. As some may already know, PCI has various requirements around monitoring and alerting on security controls. It's worth mentioning in this section that you can send your insights or Security Hub findings to CloudWatch and enable alerting and auto remediation activities in order to assist you in preparing for these requirements. So let's walk through some of the features of the PCI standard. We'll click on Compliance Standards. If you've used Security Hub before, you'll likely see the CIS enabled already. Now you'll see a new standard for the PCI DSS version 3.2.1. Let's go ahead and enable the standard. We prompted with the screen reminding you about pricing as well as enabling AWS config. We'll go ahead and click enable again. It may take a moment to get set up, but once it's active, you will get a compliance readiness score similar to what you see on the CIS side. Great, now it looks like it's ready, so let's view the results. So here you will see the different checks related to PCI standard. We have currently 32. And you can navigate the screen and look at the different checks via page numbers here, or you can filter using the search bar. So for example, if you are looking for controls related to access control, let's try searching for something such as 7.2.1. And you can see here we filtered on the controls that are related to requirement 7.2.1. Additionally, you can use the box here to filter. We can filter on all failed controls, the past controls, some unknown controls, and really the unknown is related to possibly the config rule not seeing a resource or a resource not deployed or not applicable to the control. We can also do all disabled controls. So let's take a look at one of these controls here. Let's take a look at CloudTrail. So for each rule, you will see the unique identifier, a title, and then the related PCI requirements. You'll notice here that multiple requirements can be mapped to the same control. Also, the same requirements can be mapped to more than one control. Additionally, there's a new feature here with severity label. These labels were added to help prioritize remediation of a finding. And the severity of a finding is determined by an assessment of how much it would increase the risk of an AWS resource being compromised if this issue is detected. And this is what Security Hub is going to apply to all their security controls and is not specific to PCI. Additionally, we've got our passed or failed mark. And below that, we'll have a number followed by passed or failed or unknown, for example. And this number correlates to the number of accounts that either passed or failed, for example. So in this scenario, we had one account that passed, so we have one passed here. Another new feature we have is the ability to disable a check. So let's give a scenario. Maybe you are a service provider and you don't store cardholder data, but per customer agreement, you've decided to adhere to PCI DSS. So we'll want to look for controls such as maybe encryption key management for the storage of cardholder data. This may not apply to you, so let's go in and look at how we disable that control. So here we've got requirement 3.6.4, rotating encryption keys that store cardholder data. What you'll do is you'll disable this by clicking this button. You'll be prompted for a reason for disabling the control. You won't be able to move past this screen unless you provide a reason, and I'll show you that here. So let's put something in. Example corp does not store cardholder data, not applicable. We'll click disable. Once it's in effect, you'll see the control grayed out. We've got a date the control was disabled, as well as the reason for disabling control. It's not a bad idea to be more detailed here for the reason, as an auditor will most likely want to verify why this control is disabled and see if it actually should be disabled. So if circumstances change and your customers want you to store cardholder data now for them, easy enough. We can re-enable the control by clicking it here, and it goes back to its previous state. So if you're preparing for an assessment, you'll most likely want to start by filtering on your failed checks to see what gaps you may have in your environment. So let's do that. You can see here are all our failed checks. Let's click on one to see what the finding provides for us. So as you can see at the top, we have some similar information that we saw on the other screen. We've got compliance status, severity. We have last evaluation, which is how long ago this check ran. And then we have remediation instructions to the right. And we'll dive into this in a moment, but this is a feature where if you click on this link, it'll take you to the step-by-step instructions on how to remediate this check. If we look below, we have our findings, and we have 3 here. We have the top one showing the account that failed, and then below we have the 2 user accounts that failed. So let's click on the title and see the additional information. So on the right-hand side, we have a screen come out, and at the top, we have a finding ID. We click this, and this will actually give us the finding information in the Amazon Security Finding format. And you can download this file and ingest it into additional tools for analysis. You can download this file here. Additionally, we have our severity again, as well as a description of the check. Right here in this box, we actually have the link to the config rule that is doing the check in the background. So if we want, we can click on this, and this will take us to the config console specific to this finding. And you can see here again these users that have failed the check. And from this screen, you can even select a user, go to resource actions, manage and remediate if you'd like. So we'll go back to the Security Hub console. These next few fields is going to be similar to what you'll have in the security finding format file above. We've got the account ID, severity, compliance status, the created date for the finding, and the last updated time and date for the finding. Additionally, we've got a field for types and related findings. This is basically a category we place the finding in. Resources. This describes the resources associated with this particular finding, and we clicked on the one for account, so we see the account here. And finally, here's the remediation link I referenced earlier. If we click on this, this will actually take us to our user guide. Here, we're taken to the step-by-step instructions on how to configure MFA for a user. If we scroll up, you'll see that this is the related fields and documentation that Michael referenced in the user guide. And this one is specific to the MFA control we were looking at. All right, and with that, that was a quick view and demo of the PCI standard for Security Hub. I'll pass it back over to Rima.
Thank you, Logan. I also want to mention that all the findings that are ingested into Security Hub or generated by the Security Hub standards get sent to AWS CloudWatch as events. So with that, you can use Amazon CloudWatch to create specific rules looking for these events, and you can tailor them to what you're interested in. And you can set up your target to do certain remediations. You can use whether it's a Lambda function, automation docs, or some step functions. You can also choose the target to be things like chat or ticketing or on-call management platforms. So this is a really nice workflow for you to develop these workflows for your remediation efforts. For additional resources on remediation, you can visit and take a look at the webinar and some videos that we are sharing in this slide deck, as well as some blog post references. And these slides are going to be made available to you after the tech talk. Okay, next I'm gonna take some time to do a demo for how can you use the Security Hub APIs via the CLI to do more automation, whether it's enabling, disabling Security Hub standards, doing some useful filtering via your CLI. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to be using, I just wrote some commands for this demo, so I'm just going to keep that up. I do assume that you would have your CLI environment ready before you can start running these commands. Okay, so we're going to be demoing this in Frankfurt. That's the region. And as you can see, I'm in the compliance standards page in Security Hub. CIS is enabled. I'm just going to leave it as is. And then a PCI DSS is a new standard. I do not have that enabled in my account in that particular region. So let's go ahead and first enable Security Hub PCI DSS. So for that, there is an API for batch enable standards. I'm going to just copy that. Now, I want to mention that my CLI is configured for Virginia, so I'm just going to override that at the end of the command line. All right, so let's take a look. So that's a Security Hub specific API. It is the batch enable standards. This means that you can actually enable multiple standards together in a batch. You will need to provide the ARNs for the standard. So for the PCI DSS, notice that the standard, it does include the region. So the ARN for the standard includes the region, and this is because Security Hub is a regional service. You next provide the standard name, PCI DSS. Also notice that we do include the version of the actual standard. So we are in 3.2.1. And again, I just added the region to override the region configuration in my CLI. So looking at the response here, you can see that the standard status is now pending, which means it's being enabled in the background. The standard ARN will appear here, and then we also have the subscription. So let's take a look in the console and see what that looks like. It is taking a bit of time, so let's actually run another command to check if the standard is enabled. So we can use the Security Hub git enabled standards. And then here we can see that we do have now two standards. The CIS, AWS Foundation, which was something I had enabled in the past. And now we can see the PCI DSS with the standard status ready. Let's go back to the console. Just going to refresh the page. And as you can see, the PCI DSS standard in my account in region Frankfurt is now enabled. And the readiness score is already calculating. All right. Let's look at some other useful commands. One of the things that you might be interested in now, imagine that, using the UI is great, but imagine that you have hundreds or thousands of accounts and each account has multiple regions, and you want to maybe write a script and do certain automation, right? So this would be a good use case for using these commands. But I do want to also show you that you can actually do a describe for the standard control. So for instance, like you want to have a JSON blob for all the controls that are associated with a specific standard. So I'm going to show you how you can do that with using the describe standards control. So I'm just going to copy that. Again, you want to always make sure that you have the account within the RN, and then you want to have the region in the RN. Okay, and so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be describing the standard controls. And you can see we have 32 entries. Each entry is the actual control. Now, what I find useful is the control status is included in the response, right? So let's say that you want to maybe do some script where you are validating that certain controls are always enabled, or you need to provide some evidence of the number of controls you're running. This would be a good way to do that. You will notice that there's a control ID, the title, and description. The severity is also included as metadata. Okay. The other command that I want to show you is the filtering. So actually, it's the git finding, but we can use filtering with that. So you might want to do some filtering on a specific PCI DSS findings. Now, note that the git finding API, if you do call it without any of the filtering parameter, will return all the findings, right? However, if you're interested only in the PCI DSS, we can add the prefix filtering parameter. Okay, so let's take a close look. We have get finding, filter, the generator ID. Now think of a generator ID as the control, right? Like which control provided this background check and gave me this particular finding. So that's essentially the generator ID. We are looking for any finding that is starting with this prefix. So let's run this command. Okay, so it took a tad longer because we just have a lot of findings, right? So there's a lot going on here. So let's take a look at this one last finding here that we have. So you'll find a lot of useful information. And if you do recall what Logan was showing us, you can go to the finding ID and look at the JSON blob, the ASFF representation of the finding. And this is basically it. So you can, you can just directly use that through the get that through the CLI. And so this is the generator ID that I was mentioning. So this is essentially what generated the particular finding. And you can see that the PCI DSS is the prefix. This is the control name. You have some dates if you're interested. Now, the severity related to this finding, if you ever see the severity is not 0, that means that it's in a failed state. So if you look down here, you're going to see that the compliance status for that finding is failed. You will see that when, so this is another example where the severity is like 70, where the one I was showing you is 1. So if you are to prioritize remediation, I would recommend that you start with something that has a higher severity. The severity scoring is something that is not PCI related, as Michael mentioned, but it is certainly something that's more of like an AWS security indicator, right? Note that also the severity has a label representation. So if you come to the product fields, and if you look at the severity label, it is high. So there is critical, high, medium, and low. If you do see a severity with a product in a normalized 0, that means that it's in a passed state. And typically it will be informational. And you can see here that the compliance is passed. Okay. Finally, I want to show you a scenario where you might need to programmatically use the CLI to disable a particular control. So for that, you can use the update standard control. So I'm going to just copy this command. Okay, so let's take a look. Update standard control. You want to provide the standard control ARN, which is something that you can get from the describe standard that I just demonstrated. So you will get the ARN specific to the control that you want to disable. And so you can see that the last section of the ARN will have like the identifier. So this is related to the PCI auto scaling. And then you want to specify what status you want to associate with this control. So here we are specifying the key disabled. And then similar to the UI, you must specify the disabled reason. Otherwise, this won't work. And so here we just, I just put that this is not applicable for my service or something like that. And then again, the region is just to override. Always make sure that, again, the region and the account are correctly set up. And then I'm going to run this. You won't get a response, but we can go to the console just to kind of demonstrate. So we know that this is auto scaling 1. And so if we go to the PCI DSS standard in the UI, you can see that it is already disabled. And then the reason that we specified. Okay, and finally, I'm going to show you how we can just revert that. And so what we're trying to do here is we want to enable it again. Everything remains the same. The only thing that we're going to change is the value enabled, and everything is the same. Okay, and then if we go back to the UI, just gonna refresh. And if we look at the results, we'll see that it's back on. All right, finally, let's go ahead and just disable this control. Like, assume that you know, for some reason you don't need PCI running in every region or in every account, and you might want to disable it in target regions for target accounts. So you can envision writing a script to do that automatically, and all you would need to change is just the account and the region. All right. So the API that we're going to use is the batch disable standard. We're going to give it the RN. And okay. So you can see that I got an error because I actually forgot to add the -1. So let's just fix that. And try it again. And you can see in the response, now the status is deleting. And while this is happening in the background, it doesn't really take that long. So if we come to the console, you can see that it's already disabled. Okay, with that, we come to the end of our talk. Thank you all for joining us. We were able to cover some basic features for Security Hub, give you an overview. We did focus on the PCI DSS standard. Michael provided a deep dive into the PCI DSS standard. Logan provided us with a demo, how you can use the standard using the console to help you with your PCI DSS activities. And then we finally did a demo of using the CLI to disable the control and do some useful filtering. With that, we're ready for our Q&A session.